So is everybody ready for the last session of the day? I know, I'm the last person between you guys and beer and food. So hoping everyone's had lots of great conversations today, learned lots of great things, yeah? Yeah? Okay, I'm gonna make you guys be alive for this last hour. So you're gonna have to work for that beer, I'm sorry. But I'm not really. So talking about whether everyone who is working with a software development team needs to know how to code. Is there anyone in this room who does not have an opinion? That's what I thought. So, usually when I'm giving talks, it's, okay, so here are the facts and here are the things you need to know. And people are just like, yes, Heather, you know things, Heather. Sure, Heather. This is not one of those situations. This is a situation where it's a topic that just applies to our lives. So I'm going to set up some groundwork, and then really I'm going to open the floor to everyone in here. And we're going to have some conversation, have some debate. I'm going to be capturing it all, and then maybe at the end we'll come to some conclusions, or maybe we won't. So on that note, I am Heather Bauer. I have my Master's of Science in Human Factors in Information Design, which is a fancy way of saying that I help people do what they need to do with the least cursing and crying possible. And someone gave me a degree in that. And I am a co-organizer of Drupal Nights, sponsored by Bauer. That's who I work for, by the way. That was the first bullet. Oops. Also co-organized the Boston Service Jam in 2014 and was an expert in residence for General Assembly's UX design class in 2014. A little bit more about Bioraft. We're hiring. We are an enterprise safety, compliance, and training software for lab scientists. We're making sure that the lab scientists we're working with are staying safe, trained, and compliant, and out of the news for bad things, and only in the news if their research is awesome. That is our goal. And so, as I said, to that end, we're hiring. You can talk to me about this later, or Michelle is in the back, and we have a table over there, and I'm not going to beat that horse. So, who does this conversation pertain to? All those people. So designers, project managers, product managers, UX professionals, information architects, technical writers, marketing folk. This conversation is relevant to developers too, because this is the people who they're going to be working with. So in short, it applies to anyone who is touching a software product. And is that everyone in the room? Is there anyone in the room that does not apply to? Cool. So far, we're all on the same page, and that's awesome. So, I'm gonna start off with some raise of hand questions. Can you raise your hand if you code, however you define that? Okay, so that's a little more than half the room. Just for giggles, if you do not code? Okay, and then there's the third of the room who isn't quite up to the hand raising. Cool. Okay, so within those levels, okay, so then the question is, should everyone know code? So first, raising your hand if, yes, absolutely, it is the next form of literacy, and people who do not know are really just missing out on something. Okay. Everyone working with everyone who's working with a developer in some way, shape, or form. Okay, and what about people who think it'll probably make these people's lives easier, but it's not absolutely necessary? Okay, and I'm seeing some people from the first group switching over to the second group. And how about only if they're really interested? Okay, seeing a few hands there. And no way, absolutely not. Trust the developers to do what they do, and I'll do what I do. Okay. So most people seem to be in the probably yes category in this room. So me having my background in UX research and having a master's degree, what did I do? I created a survey real quick and I sent it out to a bunch of people. And so crunched some numbers and just ask the same questions that I asked you, but instead of do you code yes, no, there was some variation in there. And I know some people in this room actually took this survey, so if you did, thank you. And really, it's a large portion of people are falling in that it probably makes life easier. So, okay. I will tell you my opinions at the end. But first, I want to hear some of the thoughts in the room of what are some of the pros and cons of knowing to code. And Michelle's got a microphone too for the sake of the recording. So I'm going to start off with a pro of knowing to code is that you are able to talk to the people who are doing the work to make the thing in their language. So I will call on you guys even though it's a Friday afternoon. All right.
Thank you. Well, for one, I think that it is not required for people to know how to code, but it helps. And that can be integrated like in different parts of the process. For example, for one project, Todd was the designer, I was the developer, and just for the fact that he knows about Drupal, like being able to use classes similar to Drupal or certain parents similar to Drupal makes the process a whole lot easier. It's not like if any designer can design someone and Drupal can be implement that design, but just for the fact that he knows the system and he has some context, then it is easier for us to implement. And in the end, that is again for everyone because that turns out in less time, spending in implementing that, reduce costs, and it is easier to maintain, to change, and so on, because like both designer and developers like understand the system. Whereas if that is not the case, you get handed anything and you need to figure that out. So it is not required, but it helps.
Yeah, hi. I do actually send a lot of email marketing campaign and all those ones. And then I rely many time on developers to give me the email template or design or all those things in it. But sometimes if I need to change something very quickly and then I'm in middle of sending the email and then I realize that, oh, this is wrong, I need to change it. If I know the code, I can quickly fix it and then do it. So that's why I thought it's good to know the coding.
This is what I thought of, and it's part of the reason why I was here today. When I was first married, somebody gave me the book of love languages and understanding the language that your partner speaks so that you can communicate better. And it reminded me of that. That's what I think about is if you can speak that other person's language, you can communicate more clearly.
So while Michelle is getting to the back of the room, we're actually no. I know Danny's side. So
What?
Go ahead, Danny.
You're telling me
I'm telling you that you're probably going to make my point for me, so I'm going to let you
a
talk.
little bit. Well, I suppose. So I think having been on both sides of the fence, coding, non-coding, what I find is that being focused on code as the thing that creates that common language is very limiting to the people who aren't coding every day. And it creates this weird dynamic between designers and developers where they honestly seem to believe, well, if you just knew code, you'd get it, as opposed to like really understanding what it takes to make something beyond that. So it's important to be able to speak with developers in a language that they understand. And I certainly enjoy having the ability to call bullshit on people because I've done that. So you can't tell me it can't be done because I done did it. What I have found, certainly as I've grown in my career, is that being able to step back from the code and look at things holistically made me much better at what I did.
All right, and I'm just going to put it out there. You can call bullshit on people without knowing code. I do it quite regularly. You just learn their tells. It's like playing poker.
Actually, I agree that I think if everyone's focused strictly on the code, you get tunnel visioned. I do think that if there's a case on a team that maybe you have a facilitator there acting like a translator. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of teams need a facilitator anyway, but I don't feel that it's necessary. And if you have someone who's usually learning code just because they feel they need to, it's going to be a little bit shallow and enough to get everybody in trouble.
Yeah, Michelle actually made this point to me last night. If you know just a little bit, you can literally know enough to be dangerous. Oh, yeah, I did this thing and it looks good, but there's this now giant security hole. Mack truck, drive right through. I've got another microphone if someone else wants to volunteer to run around.
I would offer the perspective that to be coding doesn't mean you have to work on the code. And in some ways, I agree that, having everyone contribute to the project does make you tunnel vision and you can see limitations. But I think that code is something that could be used separate from the code base that defines the product, and just be little vignettes that help you communicate more clearly than written language or illustrations or animations.
All right, so is there anyone who is firmly in the people can really do these jobs without knowing code camp? Okay, I want to hear a little bit more from you guys to get this debate a little bit more two-sided.
While I'm walking, I'll speak. I think there's a certain amount of jargon that helps communicate. Like if you are not a coder, but you know what a node is, it's a piece of content, you don't need to understand how they're built. So that's my 2 cents. It's just understanding some of the terminology. You don't need to know why it's a node, or that's actually now an entity and not a node. That doesn't matter. It's still a piece of content. You were next, I think.
So I guess what I've been hearing is that there's something that feels like everybody agrees on, which is that it's important to be able to have communication between different sort of team members and different roles on a team, but that maybe there isn't like one definitive best way to create that communication. And really, like what I see is you as a team need to decide how are you going to communicate if what you've decided is that the developers can count on everybody else to know a certain amount of terms or jargon or code, or be able to write some pseudocode for some complex feature where it's the best way to communicate what the requirements are, like then you need to learn that much if that's what you as a team have agreed upon. I also think it's the term, like, when you asked, like, do you code, there's a lot that's sort of hidden in that word, and the way that you use that, when you say it that way, like, do you code, like, to me, that means, like, are you good at coding? Could that be like your full-time job? Not just like, do you hack around a little bit and like understand code a little, and you can, break things and take a long time to fix them, and all that fun stuff. So getting clear on exactly what, like, do you have to be sort of full-time developer quality coder, or is it, as you said, is it, I think it's sort of like there's pluses and minuses here. Like it can be useful to know how to code, but it also means like, as a project manager, I'm like stuck in the middle of trying to like fix some broken, Git merge, because I was like, oh, I can just add this image to the Git repository really quickly. I don't want to bother the developer with that, so I'll just do it myself. And I don't think there's one answer. It's like, there, but it seems other than communication is important.
And I think you just hit the nail on the head. It really depends how things are being defined. And I mean, of course, I'm in usability, so like is often the answer, it depends. And I think the piece that we're getting to is what it depends on. If you know, oh, well, it depends. Okay, that doesn't help me get closer to an answer. But what you were saying, it depends on what the team decides they need. I love that point. I think Danny was dying to say something.
So I will say the thing that I was kind of dying to say was, Brad, do you even code? Sorry, I just had to. I had to. But no, back to the piece about communication, I think there's always, like, I'm a big prototyper. I think most people know this. And there's the people who want to prototype in the browser and the people who want to prototype in a tool like Acture, which is what I use. And while, yes, it depends, the thing that knowing Drupal has, the value that knowing Drupal has brought to me and to the teams I work on is I can include annotations in my Acture prototype that say these are the parameters that we need for the view that's going to make up this page. These are this is where this data is going to come from. I can flesh out a content model. I can have workflow diagrams. There's all sorts of extra stuff that helps the developers understand what it is that actually needs to be built, and help stakeholders understand the experience that this person is going to move through, that I have found really lacking when people go straight to, like, here's a quick, set of design patterns that we're putting together. So I think that the two different ways of communicating serve different purposes. So on our team, for example, I will do things in Acture and our designers will do things in Acture, but then Colleen and our front-end developer put them in Pattern Lab. So we have actual code and CSS that is then used to decide what output Drupal is going to put out and how it's going to be styled. So I think the two need to work hand in hand. You can't just have one or the other.
There's something to be said about understanding site building too, not necessarily the code, but how all the pieces in Drupal are put together.
All right, up front here. We've gotten dueling microphones now.
That's pretty much what I was going to say. I don't think it's so much that it's necessary to be able to code, but I think it's useful to have an understanding of coding concepts. Similarly, I think the developers should have a basic understanding of design concepts on the flip side. But with Drupal specifically, I think it's really, really useful for everybody on a team that is involved in a site project to have an understanding of Drupal concepts. So even down to what the process on the team is for site building. So it might be a case that, okay, a client asks for, we want to add something to a right side block, but the way that we develop stuff is using panels, so that adds an additional layer of complication. So I think it's good for everybody down to the project manager on a team to have an understanding of just the concepts and the working, and just so that when a client asks for something, or when the designers ask for something, or a information architect suggests something, that they understand the actual time cost of those requests. That's basically it.
Okay, I'll just throw the gauntlet over here. I do think that if you're a designer, you shouldn't have to be made the emergency full stack developer when things hit the fan. And the reason I say that is because while it is really valuable to have a good shared understanding and common language in the team, the problem, especially with some organizations, is that this kind of expectation can really go far, especially if it is unchecked. So we do need to be able to set those expectations as to how much understanding of the code base, and all of the shebang in the project. How much knowledge do we really need to have as a shared entity, so that we can definitely play to the strengths of each individual team, and not necessarily have to I mean, there's something valuable but cross-functional teams, but the thing that we don't want really to happen is, to overburden something with something that he or she cannot really play to the best of their ability.
I know one of the responses I got when I put the survey out there, so I put this out to my my school alumni group, a product management group, and a Drupal group. So, getting some very different opinions. And I'm going to just recount one of the things that one of my UX group folks said, and it's that if they were expecting everyone to be able to be that emergency full stack developer, that the unicorn, it inherently devalues that other thing that is that person's real job. Food for thought. And if we get the microphone over to him for the next front corner with a hat.
I was going to say something snarky, I think. I think this comes down to what you're saying kind of comes down to what is the right balance of talent on a team. And in development teams, it's very easy to become insular and to think that, and to become, there's sort of an us versus them, where the designers don't feel like the developers get it. The developers don't feel like the designers get it. And you need to be able to find that balance, and you need to be able to find the value in what somebody does. So, for example, one of the things that I tend to bristle at is when a developer says, well, I can't make things pretty, as if that's what design is. Well, you're the design expert, which really means you know what color should go here. But then I also know that developers get annoyed when I start going into a view and just changing the damn parameters because I know how to do it. And they're in the middle of something and I have a crisis. So I'm just going to go in and do that. And that annoys them. So I think that when we get into these kind of conversations, we have to understand that, like, that's what it comes down, that's kind of what this comes down to, is what is the right balance of skills on a team, and is it really fair for us to always be expecting the non-coders to bend over backwards to cater to the coders?
And I'm going to add one more thing to finding the balance. It's also finding the trust. All right, up front, I think we had someone?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I would agree entirely that it's unrealistic to expect a designer to be a full stack developer. And I think that expecting designers to even contribute production grade code is, it's quite a stretch. But at the same time, I feel like if you're designing for browser-based media, it's your responsibility to know the material properties of that medium and be able to communicate within that. In the past, working as a print designer in branding and doing packaging, if I didn't know, that a box would collapse if you stacked 3 of them on top of it because I spec'd the wrong box board, I wouldn't be doing my job. And I feel like if you don't know, like, if you're not planning the responsive behavior of your site, you're not doing your job. And I feel like a lot of the tools that are available only allow you to do like some of the work that you could be doing if you were expressing yourself in a more articulate way in code.
So I'm going to actually ask you a question before you hand the microphone back. So you're talking about, you were mentioning designers specifically. What about the other members of the team? I mean, it takes more than a developer and a designer to make things happen.
Mm-hmm.
So what about everybody else? And that's sort of a question to the larger group, but you have the microphone right now.
Yeah, it probably depends on the scope of your team, but I feel like if you're, contributing visual elements or interface and interactions, those you kind of have to be in there. You have to be participating in that. Like any software that abstracts the communication of like interactions and interfaces, I think it ends up being really limiting. I definitely could see like research roles not necessarily needing to code, or content editors maybe don't need to do that kind of thing, but like design like that is engaged with the actual product, I think should be able to.
Okay. Who has the other microphone? Okay.
So it's a bit of what you said and a bit of what you said about the content editors on our team. They think that they should know code, and they feel that it's just an easy thing to learn. And I think it goes to trust that when they want something and they don't understand the developers of how long that it's going to take for us to put something in, and they just go into the content and start doing 80 divs and some tables and maybe putting some inline classes and, oh, I grabbed this JavaScript from this website I found, and not understanding that that's not coding. You have to understand more of the concepts of it. So I want them to understand the concepts of, not just the content editors, but also our project managers and people that aren't designers or developers on our team, so that they can better understand what our jobs are, and that's what we do full time. But also, I don't want them to say, well, I don't know how to do that, and depend on us for everything, because then we get bogged down. So there is that balance, and I hate to, like, it feels like that, but it's also like, I don't want to tell someone they can't do something if they're interested in it, but...
So a question to the people who spend the majority of their time writing code. That is how I'm going to operationally define developer for this moment. Do you ever feel like it devalues all the hard work that you've put in when people are like, oh yeah, everyone should know to code, and like it's just a thing that everyone should know? So getting a couple of head nods there. Because I feel like at the end of the day, we have to remember, like, y'all put a lot of hard work into what you do. Can't necessarily pick that up overnight.
No, but I hate to bring it back to designer versus developer, but it does tend to always go that way. And I go back to it because I actually started out as a graphic designer and then made the transition to being a front-end developer. And we talk about coding a lot. It is hard to learn, but there are parts of it that you can learn pretty quickly, or at least generally speaking. But I think it's a very one-sided conversation to say that everyone who's touching software should be learning our vocabulary, because there is a vocabulary for graphic design, there's a vocabulary for user experience, there's a vocabulary for project management. So I do think we all have to work at having some understanding of each other's languages in general, so that we can have conversations. And another piece for me is just where I work, I don't always get in front of the client. And so when there are people who are communicating for me on my behalf who don't understand code, and you say you can call bullshit on people, and that's true. Definitely developers say, oh no, we can't do that, when you can. But there's a trade-off when there's a budget, when there's a project length, deadlines, just the amount of work that you're dealing with. Sometimes something that has been promised to the client isn't really realistic. And it ends up being something that takes a lot more time than someone who doesn't understand the technical aspect knows.
Yep. Michelle.
I really like how you said that you started as a designer and you've moved into a front-end developer. I started as a developer and I've moved into project management. And on our team, we have product and project managers who don't know how to code, who don't need to know how to code because their area of expertise is so unique and rare. Like, we value them for that. But when there is that conversation or that clarification where we're having communication challenges, that's part of my responsibility is to step in because I bridge both sides. And a lot of times on a team, there is someone that has two skill sets that they're good in, but they switched careers, throughout. And I think that's another opportunity is like, not everyone needs to, but if maybe there was someone on the design team that had some coding skills, just one person to jump in when need be, and someone on the project management side who has experience in coding too, that can really make a difference.
Yeah, well, I find that I also started out in print design and then I moved more and more onto the web. And now I'm designing and coding. And the more you want to have control and efficiency, the more you want to learn about code and also stay in touch with the community and see, oh, what's going on here? It used to be like 5 years ago if somebody said, oh, I want rounded corners on this box. And you're like, no, I'll have to line up images and download images and it'll really stink. And now you can just do it in CSS3 and there's enough adoption of that in the browsers. And I know that. And it's like, okay, cool. And recently, I've just started a job in January 2015 redesigning a college website to make it mobile. And I'm putting it in Drupal because I have Drupal experience. And the print designer's like, you know what's important? Vector graphics. I'm making the Facebook icons in vector graphics in Illustrator, and then I'm exporting them to Photoshop. And then I'll design this, social media sidebar, and you put it on the website. And I'm like, no matter how you do those images with clever aliasing and this and that and this and that, it's never going to be as sharp as, font awesome icons. And I know about them because I'm part of the community. And also we're not downloading images onto mobile. And we can just scale them and recolor them. So when people say, design or do you code? And I'm kind of like, well, both, they have to inform each other.
It's interesting that a lot of the stories I'm hearing of like these people need to learn how to code or no code or however you're defining it in that conversation. It sounds like just a lot of communication of like, can we do this? Can we not do this? And it sounds like we're, the idea is that maybe code is a shorthand to getting that understanding.
So I think it's important to outline that code is not the only way to plan for responsive behavior. So we do responsive actual prototypes all the time. We show all the different states. And the thing about trying to push people towards one or the other and say, well, if you're designing for the web, you have to know the medium. This is the kind of thing that ends up, and I've seen it over and over and over again, being the reason why frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation, which were only meant to be throwaway prototyping tools, end up on production websites. And why so many times you see CSS that has just been hacked to bits because you had to spend so much time overriding the opinionation of these different frameworks because so many designers needed to learn how to code and ended up finding shortcuts. I'm not saying that that's your particular situation, but I am saying that's a situation I've seen at least half a dozen times on half a dozen websites, large, heavy websites. And the reason why they took forever to load is because these designers were using Bootstrap and Foundation, and the developers just said, oh, we're just going to use Bootstrap out of the box. Another thing we had with the previous designer is we had someone who didn't want to think about responsive at all. He just said, oh, well, we're just going to use out-of-the-box Bootstrap for that. Because he had a generic understanding of what the framework could do. And to me, I almost find it disrespectful to my front-end developers to be handing them code because they know how to do it a hell of a lot better than I'm going to be able to figure out. That's my thought, but.
Thank you, Danny. Is there another microphone out there somewhere? Okay.
Yeah, so I started writing down like a list of things that were like very specific, like where is it in a team where it's really useful to have some other knowledge set outside of your own? And I think, I mean, several people have talked about this idea of like, I think there's an idea that if a designer can deliver a, responsive HTML, CSS prototype, that's like the best way to deliver their vision for how it's going to work, because it's the only way to really completely think of every different state that you need to think of. I mean, Danny, you're talking about Axure. That, I think part of the reason that sort of writing code has become maybe like the default answer is because there aren't a lot of really great tools that make it really easy for designers to communicate that, and that what you're normally getting is, a PDF with, right. I mean, if you're getting the Photoshop comp, maybe you're even lucky, or you get what you get. I mean, the last project I worked on, we got 4 Photoshop files. Each one was more than 500 megabytes, and they were completely unusable. And so, it's like the question of what's the right deliverable, I think, is still like that's up in the air, but it still is about how do you hand off sort of design decisions to developers, and how does the developer inform the design by what can the technology actually do, and have a conversation. So it's either a designer who is really interested in the development side of things and is thinking about that, or it's a developer who's interested in the design, or it's 2 people or a team of people who have found a way to go through that cycle of like, I want it to look like this, and I want to build it like this, and then how about we try that, and going through that process of figuring out where did the design and the technology meet. And I think that's going to be the same thing for, if you're a project manager, how much do you need to know? Like, is it important to be able to look at the code in a Git commit and have some sense of what that's going to do? Like, is that useful? Or, sometimes on some projects, I will run a couple Git commands that will spit out the last commits, all the commits since the last deployment, so I can use that to put together release notes for the client, so that we know like what's actually getting deployed in this next deployment. And so there's like little things like that, and they're all like, we happen to be talking about code here, but as somebody else said, it could be, I mean, we could be talking about something else. We could be talking about any aspect of like managing a project, or designing a project, or sales. I mean, there's plenty of things that it's useful to know something else, but you still, I mean, I guess it goes back to my original point, is that as a team, you sort of need to decide, where are those competencies of sharing the information, so that what the client thinks they want actually, gets built, and at least, something close to that, or at least you've convinced the client that they want something different, or, there's a lot of people involved that need to, it's like a game of telephone, and making that, work effectively is the tricky part.
I do both design and development, although most people don't pay me for design. That's the sad truth. We live in Drupal, there's such a bias towards code that it's really hard to get away from it. But I just know from experience that if I'm writing code, I have to write code. If I'm going to write design, it takes me 3 days to switch the brain over to be designing, and I have to do that. And it's, in my personal experience, you can't do both at the same time. So I think it's ridiculous to expect people who are designers to code, or people who are coders, designers. I think we should, if you really want to know the answer, why don't we just flip the question? Should developers be required to be good designers? And that's a ridiculous question. So when you look at it that way, then why should designers have to be good developers?
Actually, I have a different saying here in terms of what we were discussing. When we are talking about here, actually, we are talking here two different things. One is a generic question, do everyone needs to code or not? Or when you're talking about a specific project, what are the things the team needs to do? Of course, there is a project manager, there is a designer, there is a developer. There are developer for some certain reason. They are designer for some certain reason, and there is a project manager for some other reason. So they have to do their jobs nicely, and then they have to stick to what they do best. That's for sure. But when we're talking about the generic term that do everybody need to code, I believe yes. Why it is that? Because it's not like that you are a project manager, you know how to code, you're gonna go and write the code files and I'll do all those things. But if you are a project manager and you need to create a small report or all those things, so the tools are not that good enough. If you know small script writing, you can quickly write a script, and then instead of spending the whole day creating that report, you can create that report in 5 minutes. So I'm from a technical background. I used to code in C language, that's long time back, and that is totally different these days. But at this time, like I do my job in a certain way, like I create some reports or all those ones, and my fellow project manager, my fellow agile coaches, they always think how you do that because I can code. That's how I can do that. So if in the generic term, yes, everybody need to know the code in terms of like up to some extent, but apart from other side, when you are working with the project, let them do what everyone do the best.
I love that a couple of people have called me on the fact that I haven't defined what it means to code, because that is a big part of this conversation. And people are asking, well, do we need to code? Do we not need to code? And they don't operationally define what it means. Do you know some amount of code? Can you inspect an element and change a thing and see if that does what you need it to do? Or do you need to be writing production-ready code? And so that's a whole other layer within this debate that I think a lot of people are ignoring. Not in this room, just in the greater debate.
Hi. I have to agree with you about the different layers. And I started off as a graphic designer, but I've always been interested in code. And I have to say, I would never be able to design in code. You have to do it on two different mediums. And along with that, whenever my designs move into code, I always find holes. I always find design fixes. There's always things that need to be optimized. And with that said, it's up to who at that point, the designer who doesn't know how to code or the developer who doesn't know how to design. So I find myself in a position at Pega where I'm filling in those gaps of, oh, well, the designer didn't consider this and the developer's not sure what to do. How are we going to fix that? So maybe it's not a designer versus developer, but maybe we're coming to a point where we need somebody who has a different skill set. We need to hire somebody else who can merge the two.
And I love you used the word interest in code, and that to me is what the crux of this is. I don't write code, but I have enough interest that I can talk to our developers and be like, okay, so you're telling me that you can do this thing, but it's going to take a long time. Why? And getting those high level things and, poking around in some HTML and JavaScript and to make the bubble chart. I pulled one of our developers over in a break he was having. I was just like, hey, you want to help me learn something new? And so I feel like a lot of the people that I've talked to who get into these projects, they may not know code, but to be passionate about what they do. They have to have some level of interest in understanding how it works. You know, I'm never going to work on cars because I don't care how the engine works. I just need it to. So that's just not where I'm going to be the most effective. But the other piece of what Colleen said that I want to address is, you know, there are gaps, and then what happens? And on our team, that's when a developer comes to whoever was designing and says, there's a hole. Let's discuss how to fix it, how to fill it in. And they might come to me with we could do this, or they might just be like, I don't know, help. I can guess, but it's not going to be what you want. And it's just keeping those communication channels open that we've been talking about so much. And I think we're going to get to last comment, and then we're going to go towards conclusions. So who has microphones? Okay, go ahead.
Wow, that was loud. What you were saying brings me back to the role of a facilitator. Sometimes that third party, whether it be someone who does specialize in UX or somebody who just is that separate third party. And I really think what you had mentioned about the definition of code being ignored is kind of a huge stopping point in this. I mean, some people say they can cook because they can make eggs over easy and put it on a plate and it looks good, and other people make a blood orange souffle with a raspberry sauce and something right off the Food Network. We're really being kind of loose, and I guess if we can be that loose with a definition of code as professionals discussing it, why would we need the people on the team, everybody on the team, to have a firm definition in order to be successful? If we have open communication, somebody who can speak, whether it be the project manager, the UX, whomever, someone who can speak to it right along, it comes down to the communication, not the knowledge base.
Thank you. That was a great comment to wrap up on. And good news is, just because this session is going to end soon, we also have another day full of sessions tomorrow and a day of sprints on Sunday. So we can continue having this conversation, because I saw there were a few more hands. So what are the conclusions here? I think that we're all coming to the conclusion that, you know, really this is a communication problem. And this is one solution to this communication problem is everyone should be speaking the same language. And, well, developers need to know code, so that's going to be our language. But I think that's a very limited way. How many times have you had a client come to you and say, this button isn't standing out enough, it needs to blink? And so what they are posing as a solution is really a problem statement in disguise. And so really saying that everybody needs to learn to code is a problem statement in disguise. Really, the problem that your client is bringing you is that people can't find this button. And the problem that we're discussing with code is people are having trouble making the leap from one side of the conversation to the other, and the gap needs to be bridged. What we do at BioRaft, so Michelle has said that she comes from a development background. I come from a UX and recruiting background. We have other members of our team who come straight out of the labs. And so we work together and make sure that when there is a gap, we pull in someone who has the skills to bridge it. And it's not the same person every time. Even if it's the same question, it's not the same person who can fill in that one gap in every situation. So my boss and I regularly have conversations along this line of, you know, like, whose job is this thing? And, you know, what does the industry do? And after a lot of thinking, a lot of soul searching, I finally came up with a definitive answer. It's house rules. It's really whatever the people who are involved decide is the right solution, that's what the solution is that works. And if it is not working, then you need to change it. And what works for this group over here might not work for that group over there, which creates a whole different communication problem of, well, what happens when you want to go from this group to that group? But that's not today's discussion. And, maybe when you land on free parking, you just don't get sent to jail, or maybe you get all the money. And just as long as everyone who's playing the game decided at the beginning, that's what matters.